Imagine, Episode 6 by Bernard King and Nicholas Lumarine. She had the look, the one with the half smile to let you know that she knows. Jerome froze, his face expressionless as he took the keys from the receptionist. But when she handed him the envelope, it was obvious. A wife does not leave her husband an envelope 10 minutes before she is due to meet him in a hotel bedroom. He felt her eyes on his back and could almost hear her giggle as he climbed the stairs. At least now he was of more interest than our holiday photos. Puzzled, he took the uniform from his holdall and arranged it on the bed. Now, what was Jemma up to? The order, printed on a slip of paper inside the envelope, was brief. Do not wear it. I shall dress you. Sex was all about getting undressed. Except with Jemma, she probably wanted to get him dressed, go pop with anticipation, and then rip everything off. Thoughtfully, he stared at the splendid view through the window at the grimy brick wall opposite. No, that would not be Jemma. Jemma was not a ripper. She was 100% control. She pre-thought every move and then executed them exactly. Her £50 notes he placed on top of the uniform. They would not be forgotten this time, along with some of the questions he wanted to ask her. At 3 o'clock precisely, she let the door swing open and stood in the doorway looking at him. It was instant. She looked superb, desirable, and exciting, but her eyes were telling him more. There was something wrong. It showed for a second, then vanished as she moved towards him. The distance had gone, and his arms were around her as she kissed him. Tightly, her arm around the back of his head, forcing him towards her. Twice he moved back, but was held in a grip almost of panic, as if she was frightened to let go. But her hold broke the moment he started his caress. Too much. Her mouth was raw where she had pressed into him, her hand trembling as she soothed her sore lips. God, we should do that again. But the trembles had stopped, and she stood motionless. He watched her slamming down the shutters of control. But we won't. For a moment, it was again there, a glance down and a hesitation. Then she was moving, pushing off his jacket, unbuttoning his shirt, pushing him back onto the bed, yanking off his socks, and with practiced ease, flipping down his pants. He lay back in just his underpants. You have an excellent body. She picked up the uniform trousers, ready to hook the waistband over his feet. We don't wear underpants in battle. Even he realized his grin was misplaced. But he had been stripped as if he was in hospital being prepared for treatment. Stand up. Her arms were around him, and his pants slipped slowly to the floor. This was getting ridiculous. She was standing behind him. The £50 notes were brushed aside, and he was dressed in the uniform as quickly and as coldly as he had been stripped. She stood as far back as the small room allowed, expecting him, noting every fold, crease, and form of his body. Several times her eyes held his, but whatever she was looking for was not working. Way Out Jemma was not with him in the bedroom today. Her final look was underlined by a tired sigh. I'm sorry, Jerome. Slowly she moved towards the bed, hesitating slightly as she picked up her bag, and with an even longer pause, she clicked it open. I had so much pleasure planned for this meeting. The papers she had taken from her bag were the target of her frown. They remained weighed in her grip, as if an unknown force was refusing to let her pass them to him. But this has thrown me. He took the pages of A4, offering a questioning expression in return. Read, she said. It was not an order, more of a request, but heavy with reticence. It was the book. Nicholas was intruding again, hammering on with the love story. He read the manuscript quickly, the sentences tumbling at him in their haste to shock. Pages fell back onto the bed as he finished each one. The last gripped absently as the story bit into him. There was a pressure on his leg. She had sat heavily and now leaned against him, her hand snuggling into his, a lost little girl looking up at Daddy. He dropped the page and squeezed. She pulled him down and pressed her head against his neck. His relationship with Jemma was spinning again, this time into a madhouse. The story described an army uniform, a hotel bedroom, a woman winding up her lover. The strange list and the story connecting them was being told. It was their story, a story only they knew. The 4 pages of A4 smouldered on the bed beside them. Speech was impossible. Thoughts were impossible. The scenario had now had time to give Jerome a mental uppercut. He was reeling, floundering, thrashing wildly for sanity. But there was none. He was trapped in a bubble of disbelief. Totally lost, he read through the pages again, searching for a word or a sentence that could give him a clue to whatever he was searching for. But there was none. "You must have told him," he said. It was the only answer. "Not even in my sleep," she whispered. "We have separate bedrooms." "Then it cannot happen." But it had. The descriptions were accurate, the dialogue approximate, but his first quick scan of the pages had missed something. A cold chill drilled through him. He straightened, easing Jemma away. Descriptions and dialogue were real, in the public domain for everyone to see, hear, and share. But now the author had moved on, or, Jerome corrected, in. Emotions were private, secret, and personal, but not any more for Jerome. His thoughts and feelings were now ink on paper. The adjectives he had used to explain his relationship with Jemma in thought were now free for all to feel. Nicholas Lumarine had visited the inside of his head and copied his thoughts and emotions into his book. Was he typing away on his keyboard now, slapping the words onto his screen as Jerome provided them? How was he describing Jerome's total belief? Could he have any clue to where his inspiration was coming from? Probably not. A professional writer would have trained himself to churn out ideas on demand and would assume the story was a result of the usual mangling he put his mind through. But it was all there, almost every detail of their last meeting bound up and presented in story form. "Cuddle me." From Jemma, again it was not an order, but a plea. "Nothing can happen while you cuddle me." Close to her, on a bed, her warmth mingling with his, and her needing him were all hyperlinks to his heaven. But his life had not changed. With the sweet came the bitter. The manuscript beside him carried words that were staining their relationship with the impossible. Jemma had been naked and could not have concealed a recorder. The brick wall almost opposite against the window blocked any view. No one could possibly know the scene in their bedroom. But Nicholas Lumarine knew, most of it anyway. "Kiss me." Her hand guided his face to hers. He did as he was told, but the tingle would not start. Her sigh as she broke away was heavy. "He ruins everything. Now he's ruining us." Us! There was light in his darkness, a single, simple word, but for the first time she was binding them together. The privilege, warm and special, of being considered as one with the woman he adored melted a little the spectre of Nicholas Lumarine and his all-seeing powers. Implications, again bitter and sweet, sidled in. He had fallen in love with Jemma Lumarine, but the peak of his joy was blunted. He had fallen in love with the wife of a powerful person, a man who could see through walls. "I have to get away from this." Startled, he took her hand, but with a gentle squeeze placed it back on her lap. He must not hang on. He must be there, ready, but he must not try to possess. "We must stop seeing each other." The scream, as his disappointment rocketed, was almost audible. He did not want that. He did not want that at all. There had to be another answer. "We shall not meet next Wednesday or the Wednesday after." She paused in thought. Hope appeared, hauling back his disappointment. She had not signed the death warrant on his love. "And then we shall meet the following Thursday." She took his hand. "I think we really have something, Jerome." "Yes, I think so." His mumbled reply was made through a throat still muscled with panic. The possibility of not seeing Jemma again had been like the floor sliding from under him, leaving him in free fall. She lifted her head from his shoulder, trouble still clouding her eyes. "Have you ever spoken to my husband?" He returned her gaze steadily as he shook his head. "No, of course you haven't. I would be in pieces by now." She had answered her own question. "Perhaps he saw the uniform," Jerome said. "No, Jerome, it never came to my flat. Nicholas knows nothing." It would be their last visit to this hotel. They would find another when they returned from their self-imposed exile. Also, they decided, nothing would be booked and no time fixed. They would meet under the clock at Paddington Station, where spies used to meet during the last war. Sometime Thursday, 2 weeks ahead, both ensuring they were not being followed. "What about your wife, Jerome?" "There will be no problem. She knows nothing," he replied. 5 years on, and the sudden pulse of bitterness appearing in his throat still stung when someone mentioned his wife. Yet his wife was another implication. He had lied to Jemma, a lie that would have to be undone, but not now. There is an explanation. Her clue was her bag, lifted to eye level, a radio microphone or a recorder. He rejected the idea the moment she framed it. An insanely jealous husband would go ballistic if there had been a recording. Jemma would never have made this meeting. His explanation, he thought, was logical, but Jemma, the woman he was now convinced thought sideways, was thought encased and coming at him from another angle. Not necessarily. She turned and slipped onto the bed. Nicholas has nightmares about finding his next story. Jerome picked up the papers. The man was not having any bad dreams finding material for this one. He wouldn't. His thoughts were rolling down a murky lane with some very unpleasant twists. Jemma nodded slowly. Oh yes, her nodding increased in tempo. He certainly would. Nicholas, Jemma mused, was always under pressure for another book. If the chance of getting a storyline easily offered, he would grab it. Even though his wife was sleeping with another man, he nearly added almost. Faithfulness is not in his directory. It was Jemma who was now bitter. He has affairs all the time. If he had the bright idea of using the material for a book, he would not give a damn. Gemma's bag suddenly became important. Jerome reached forward. "I've checked it." The bag was moved quickly away. "There's nothing." His expression was fleeting, but she saw it. "Look." The bag was pushed back, if you don't believe me. It was an embarrassment. Madame Channel's creation sat between them, causing an uncomfortable silence. She covered his mortification with a forward lean, kissing the tip of his nose. "Now I'm going." She swung the bag over her shoulder. "I shall hate the next 2 weeks." At the door she turned. "But think of the anticipation, for you and for me, and for my Nicholas." The door clicked closed, opening Jerome's disappointment. The empty room matching his sadness. Wednesdays were now the highlight of his week. Looked forward to, a bright light in 6 dark days. Jemma had suggested the break because she was completely convinced her husband was clairvoyant, and this was her way of proving he could read her or Jerome's mind. In theory, in 14 days they would know. And Jerome pondered, what happens if they could prove he can read minds at a distance? What difference would it make? What would he write about over the next fortnight once he had covered today's meeting? The questions were marching towards him, led by their ringleader. Why him? Why him? Why him? Each time he asked himself, the question seemed even more unanswerable. Why had Jemma picked him up? And why was Nicholas able to read his mind? And if he was not reading his mind, how could he see into their relationship? These were questions for better brains than his, and one, he thought bitterly, belonged to the man who was causing most of them, Jemma's husband. For Jerome, the whole business was a mind game, coincidences he could believe. But now there were too many, and all he had were vague, hairy-fairy notions as answers. Jerome read the pages again, knowing they would deepen his worry. The story was uncannily close to their meeting last week. But again, the author had written it from Jerome's point of view. This showed Nicholas was reading only one mind, his. There was only one solution. He would have to wait for 2 weeks until their self-imposed exile had finished. There was, however, one thing he could check. Swinging off the bed, he started his prowl. If there was nothing in Jemma's bag this week, it was unlikely there had been any recorders the weeks before, which had led to his next logical thought. Under the bed, inside the wardrobe, the picture rail, skirting board, and the light fittings he examined minutely. There was no fresh plaster on the walls. In fact, everything in the room looked as if it had not been touched, cleaned, or decorated for years. The brick wall opposite cut out the use of a sensitive directional microphone, although he scanned it closely to be sure, and a thorough check of the bathroom established it was in the same unwired state as the bedroom. His further 2-minute, thoughtful, unseeing stare at the brick wall opposite was rewarded with another, more fruitful angle. Perhaps he would not have to wait 2 weeks for the answer to his question. He knew little about the work of writers, but enough to realize most worked from a storyline plotted sometimes in detail. The complicated stories that Nicholas penned must call for some sort of planning. All Jemma needed to do was search through his computer until she found the love story he was now writing. All would then be revealed, and she could stop her worrying. He pressed her number out of his telephone memory, lay back on the bed, relaxing in the warm smugness that had settled around him. Now that is a good idea. Her reply was obviously delivered through smiling lips. I'll ring you the moment I find it. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and poured himself another glass of champagne. Once Nicholas was out of the way, perhaps they could concentrate on what all affairs are based on: sex. The stalker watched through the hole he had wiped in the heavy condensation of the window of the cafe. The woman who had met Jerome Archer was talking on her telephone, slowing her descent of the chipped hotel steps as she left. Taking a pad from his pocket, he jotted down the time, adding that her conversation continued until she had passed out of sight. Widening his porthole with a further scrub with the back of his hand, he settled back, waiting for his target. The atmosphere in the cafe had an end-of-the-day heaviness provided by the aroma of dead coffee, sandwiches on the curl, and the body of an owner that had yet to discover the invention of soap. His stakeout last Wednesday had been a mess. Jerome Archer had stayed on after the woman had left. He had spent an uncomfortable night curled up in his car outside the hotel, watching the few clients come and go. Fortunately, there were no unattached females, old or young, coming in or out of the grimy building. Although he did not know the reason he was following Jerome Archer, he guessed it was to do with women or sex, or both. Adultery had lined his bank account since he had become a private detective. 3 cups of coffee-coloured tea, 1 soggy bacon sandwich, and a tired donut later, he telephoned. He's been in the hotel 2 hours, he muttered, his words sliding easily along his grease-lined throat. Keep watching. That's what you're paid for. The call snapped off. His boss didn't waste words. The cafe proprietor made as much noise as he could, clattering the chairs onto the tabletops as he watched the man in the window, as a noisy prompt for him to leave. It was closing time in 5 minutes, and he wanted to get home to a decent meal. The stalker left the cafe, and Jerome left the hotel at exactly the same moment. The stalker, framed in the cafe doorway, stared open-mouthed and then stiffened before turning quickly away. But for the jerks transmitted by his body language, Jerome would not have noticed the man. 1 minute down the road, and Jerome mused. The body could or could not be following him. 2 minutes down the road, a convenient alley offered the test. Jerome turned and sprinted towards a van, conveniently close parked against a wall. A quick wriggle between the van and the wall, and he vanished. The stalker stopped bemused by the empty passageway. A last glance along the road, and the man ran quickly to the end of the alleyway. His surprise accelerated to alarm as 3 walls of a building boxed him into a dead end. Jerome pressed in against the van. His follower's footsteps echoed with panic-driven urgency as he spun back down the alley. Sliding around the corner, he chased down the road, following Jerome's usual route. It was 30 long seconds before Jerome cautiously slid his face around the corner, and another 30 before he stepped back into the road. Nicholas is having me tailed. Jerome phoned from the safety of a doorway on the other side of the road in case a follower returned. I just trapped the guy. No. Even through the phone, Jerome could feel her fury and surprise. Maybe you are being followed as well. The pause was stretched before she answers. Thank you, Mr. Gray. That's very good of you. Her reply was brisk and out of character. Someone had obviously interrupted his call. He waited in the doorway for a further half hour. By being followed, it could explain some of the material in Nicholas's story, but not all. No one could see or hear the scene in the bedroom, and also another thought had just tickled his memory. He was really playing a bit of a lemon. Concealing himself in the doorway was total stupidity. If the man could follow him to the hotel, he had probably followed him home. Once it was known where he lived, he could be followed wherever he went, which made the reason for being followed back home also stupid. Knowing where he lived and where he went could not be why he was being followed, which left only one motive. Someone was very keen to know who he was meeting. Thoughtfully, he walked back to the bus stop, oblivious of the glances he was receiving from the people he passed. Life smacked on as he pushed his hands into his pockets for his pass as he boarded the bus. It was not there, and neither were his pockets. But then they would not be. Soldiers don't go into battle wearing underclothes or with an Oyster card in their pocket. Stepping off the bus, he was acutely aware of the stares of the passengers. Why the man who was following had gaped and stiffened outside the cafe was suddenly apparent. He had been so engrossed searching the room, he had left something behind. His clothes. His odd-looking uniform attracted more glances as his swift walk, powered by embarrassment, took him back to the hotel. His excuse that he had forgotten something was pretty lame. The receptionist's eyes were puzzled by questions she could not ask, but she beamed as she passed him the key to the room. She had always fancied men in uniform. His change of clothes took some time, punctuated by more thoughtful stares through the window at his favourite brick wall. He had assumed Nicholas was behind the stalker. People were followed to retrieve information about their movements. But supposing, just supposing, his follower had nothing to do with Nicholas or Jemma. His interest to anyone else could only be based on one other subject. He did not trust Charlie. Over the years, he had bought many weapons and ammunition from the dealer. His collection would be manna from heaven for criminals, and also for Charlie. The resale value of the guns must be now quite considerable. So, he must increase the protection of his collection. He would set a booby trap amongst his collection. But with his arsenal and a dead intruder, he would never set foot again outside a prison cell. So he would use gas. One that would not kill or maim. He would use a gated microchip to wire his 3 locks. Assuming they found his key, unless each key was used in the right sequence, the gas would release and a sleeping intruder would be waiting for him at his return. As an extra precaution, he attached the sequence wires to the pride of his collection that stood on a stand in the centre of the room. A brain gun, a weapon that when pointed at anyone who knew what it was, made it seldom necessary to pull the trigger. They either surrendered or died of fright. Okay, it was not a handgun, but a classic weapon with a long history and an exception he had made in his collection. But his satisfaction at the solution to his problem received a dent as he stepped off the bus. Annoyance at his stupidity blinded him to the shadow moving away from the window of the empty house opposite. But his leaving £50 notes scattered around the hotel bedroom would rankle well into his sleepless night. Imagine continues. The next episode in a fortnight.